My name is Sandras Phiri. I'm the CEO and founder of Startup Circles, which is a platform that enables people to launch their startups and grow their startups. And today we have somebody that's really, really well accomplished and done amazing work at companies that all went on to be over $1 billion worth. Sriram Krishnan. He's the Senior Vice President of Product Partnership and Marketing at Headspin. Headspin is a Silicon Valley unicorn, which is worth $1.16 billion. That helps you stream such services as YouTube and TikTok. That's like an easier explanation. Before that, he led international growth for Tinder, the #1 grossing mobile application in the world. He was also the head of new markets at Spotify and helped it expand from 6 to 65 countries. As an entrepreneur, Sriram is the co-founder and COO of Cosmify, which was acquired by Meltwater, and he's also an investor at Kearney Jackson. Thank you for joining us, Sriram.
Thank you for hosting me. This is fun. I'm looking at the chat, and there are so many people from all over, so this is pretty exciting.
Excellent. Thank you. Maybe we start just by you telling us about Headspin.
Headspin is a platform that helps people test, monitor, and manage performance and user experience of the applications around the world. So traditionally, when you're building applications, whether it's for the web or for mobile or for whatever platform, the process of building and testing were always very sequential. You build, you test. You build, you launch to the market, and then you test, you launch to the market, test, or you build, test, build, test before you launch. What we've done is we've sort of created an integrated platform where you can, while you are building, you test in the real world conditions before you launch. So all the 20 or 30% of what people do during performance monitoring or user experience monitoring or testing is based on real world feedback, what the users give once they interact with the product. We remove that. We sort of allow you to do it before and get these real world insights before you launch a product. So you don't have to launch a poor quality version of the app. So that's sort of the 1 minute intro.
Fantastic. Thanks. And could you tell us, you've worked at Spotify, which is again worth billions of dollars. You work Tinder, again worth billions of dollars. Now you're building Headspin. What do you think is a critical thing for companies to get to those type of valuations and revenues? And
That's a question. Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm going to start by saying that I don't think valuation should be the end all and be all. So that's something we have to put out there. I think like Spotify and Tinder and Headspin and countless of other companies have basically they sort of caught magic in the bottle. And when you catch magic, the way you catch magic in a bottle is when you ruthlessly spend a lot of time trying to understand a problem that a lot of people have been trying to solve, and making sure that your customers or your potential customers really need their problems to be solved, right? So we have to make a difference here between enterprise applications and like selling to the average consumer is very different from selling to the average enterprise. The average consumer, depending on what you build, if you're building something in the social world, then it has to satisfy psychologically the 7 deadly sins, right? Because humans are very, very status driven and ego driven. And we like gluttony and like Instagram likes is one example of validation that people like, right? So understanding the human psychology is very, very important when you're building a consumer app. So or a social app. Now, in the case of Spotify, it was just basically making it very, very easy to consume music, right? As if the millions of these tracks are locally in your hard drive. So that's a problem that Spotify thought was very, very worth solving, right? Because the world before Spotify was, hey, we're all collecting music in all these different places. But Spotify say, hey, find it all here, right? So Netflix is also a very similar thing, right? You're getting all this content from different sources, but they're giving it to you in a very, very nice place. So that's you're sort of somewhat solving a problem there. Tinder, also first of a kind. Like dating has been going on for a long time. Dating applications have been around for a long time, but dating apps for mobile were not there when Tinder started, right? So it's basically understanding the need of the customers and making sure that you ruthlessly spend a lot of time figuring out what the customer wants, and more importantly, how the market is. And then over time, if you do that often enough, if you speak to prospective customers enough, and they will then tell you explicitly or implicitly whether or not your application has got any legs. And then once you find out product market fit, then you can sort of start working on go-to-market and then scaling it. So all these three companies have that in common, where they found out that they've got a product market fit very, very early on, and then it scaled through platforms, partnerships, marketing and sales.
Tell us about that process, like the process of asking questions and learning and listening to customers. I find that sometimes entrepreneurs struggle with that because they think they know and therefore would want to build something that they think that customers would buy right away. What's the mindset that's critical to iterating and getting feedback?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So iteration is very, very important. I think a lot of people underestimate the importance of iteration or the growth mindset or the iterative mindset. A lot of people take it for granted. There's a lot of studies that show that the faster you iterate on product, right, is highly correlated to the success of the company very early on, right? So just because you're a very, very good developer or an engineer, if you take a month to test to build a new feature, right? And instead of, let's say, a week, and quick and dirty and funny and sort of releasing it in the wild, it doesn't matter whether the factor is not whether you're good or not. That's how quickly you iterate. So you are far more likely to not succeed in the early stages if you're not highly iterative. Now, if you're proud of the first version of the product, then you've done something wrong. So you like building whether it's consumer apps or enterprise apps. In the beginning, you got to be very, very quick. And there's also another term that I like to use, which is learning capacity per dollar spent. Like a lot of the iteration is basically your propensity to learn. It's a reflection, and it's a indication of how quickly you learn and apply it's a feedback loop, right? If you're building something and if you realize that it may not resonate within your audience, then that from the moment it got released to, let's say, a week later, when you realize, wait a minute, this is not like going anywhere, how long does it take for you to act on that and to build and to continuously pivot? You know what I mean? Continuously refine it is what I call learning capacity per dollar spent. And one of the ways it manifests itself is through rapid iterations. So I think talking to customers is very, very important. Understanding the pulse of the customer. In the B2B world, it's all about talking and figuring out how they use it. There are metrics that you can use very early on, but in the beginning, it's less about metrics. It's more about, have you got that magic in the bottle? Have you got that emotional connection with the consumer or the customer, right? Where they're like, this is important, this is a hair on fire problem, and you're sort of bottling that, and you're trying to figure out, wait, how can I feed that, right? So, yeah.
Okay, and could you delve a little deeper into that magic in the bottle? We'll talk about on the consumer side, and then later we'll talk about just how you approach enterprise.
Yeah, so on the consumer side, especially with consumer social, it's very, very hard. No one knows in the world of consumer social what is right or what is wrong. There's an app that was launched a month ago called Clubhouse, which is being used by very few people in Silicon Valley. They started something called Talk Show, which did not do well, and they pivoted to Clubhouse. So like in consumer social, no one knows what they're doing, and it's hard to predict the success. Pivoting is very, very important very early on within consumer social. That's where people pivot a lot. Like Slack, before Slack, it was a gaming company.
Yes.
And so there's so many examples like this. Before Facebook, it was something else. So no one knows exactly how to crack social, and that's why iteration and pivots are very, very important, right? So that's consumer. Now within consumer, you have different brackets, and your like fintech consumer is very different from, say, content consumer, right? Content consumer like Spotify, Netflix, you have to sort of wear a very different hat on. It's also not social, you know what I mean? So then you have to look at a bunch of other factors to determine whether it's successful or not. But that's social. Now for enterprise, enterprise is harder, because enterprise, you have to have a lot more empathy. You have to be to know, you have to have a unique perspective and a unique insight. Like if you don't have a unique insight on why you're better than 20 other companies in the market or why you're going to succeed, then it's very hard for you to break out. And the thing about enterprise is, unlike social, where you have free distribution in the internet, right? In the enterprise world, depending on your business model, you have to pair your unique insight and your product with a go-to-market strategy. So you can have an above average product, but and a weak go-to-market, and your company won't go anywhere, right? You can have an average product and a phenomenal go-to-market, and you can still own the market, right? So in the world of consumer, distribution is free if you've cracked the code on how to build these different growth mechanisms. But in the world of enterprise, if you're bottom up, then there's a chance that you can also grow very, very quickly because you're growing from the grassroots up. But if you're enterprise selling to large CIOs or CTOs, then you have to build a proper machine to make sure that happens. And if you are building a company in the B2B SaaS sales and marketing market, and if you tell investors you're the only one doing what you're doing and this is a unique insight, then most people are going to laugh at you, because not going to explicitly laugh at you, but they'll go back and say, wow, this guy has no idea, this person has no idea, because the sales and marketing B2B SaaS market is extremely saturated and it's very hard to break out, right? So it shows that you just haven't done your research. And if you haven't done your research, why am I gonna what makes you think I'm gonna bet on you if you don't even know your market or competitive dynamics, right? And if I ask you what's your strategy, and if you say that you're selling to CIOs and CTOs and you're using a bottom-up strategy, then that's also a bit of a misalignment, because you don't go to CIOs and CTOs bottom-up. You go to people at the lower end of the sort of hierarchy bottom up, and then you sort of so we expect founders to know this prerequisite, amongst other things, right? Because sometimes they could be very, very sharp and smart, but the market doesn't allow for a startup to succeed due to whatever reason. So we expect founders to come prepared with all this information, and when we ask questions to see whether this founder is prepared and understands the position in the market, the product, has unique insight. But more importantly, we also want to see if this founder is able to articulate the right strategy for the company that maps to our understanding of what the right strategy of the company is based on hundreds of other successful companies in the market, right? Because we see a lot of companies, and we're able to map out why an Atlassian or a ServiceNow or a Twilio are successful, because we know we sort of have seen them grow. And we've seen a lot of companies fail. Now, if you're coming in with a product and a go-to-market strategy and a unique insight, and some with no idea of competitive dynamics, that's not compelling enough for us to invest. You know what I mean? So being prepared is very, very important. We, as investors, there are a bunch of winners over here, there are a lot of losers over here, and pattern recognition. If you're a self-aware founder and entrepreneur who knows about the market, competitive dynamics, very unique insight in the product that solves a problem, it's very deep into understanding the entire market ecosystem size, then we sort of see it somewhat similar to how other companies have performed, not necessarily in this market, but who sell to the same CIO, CTO, or to the bottoms up, then we are far more likely to get funded.
Brilliant. So you've invested as an angel in a number of companies. You also co-founded a few companies and working with a few companies to grow. Question is, how can startup founders try to balance between trying to swing for the fences and being completely crazy, out of touch with reality? How do you self-assess, or how do you assess that?
Yes, startup founders are generally, you have to be some form of crazy to start a company, because you have to have a lot of conviction in what you do, to the point where you're doing it regardless of what other people think or feel. So from the very beginning, you do find people who start companies to be a little bit, intense or weird or crazy. So those are very, very common common terms, that people use to describe founders, because you have to be ruthless. You have to ruthlessly believe your ideas, right? So if you're starting a company, to swing for the fences. You're not starting a company, you know what I mean? Like those who start a company for the sake of starting a company, I don't think ought to raise venture funding. And if you try, you'd be like, people can smell it from afar, right? So those are traits that are very, very that people have come to expect and sort of expect of founders, right? They have to be some form of crazy to be able to start a company to begin with, because you're going to be thinking about it 24/7. At 11 o'clock at night, you're sleeping, you got this idea, you're going to write it down, you're going to call your teammates, right? So you're going to have to be very, very. That's the way people. Like if you're in it, you're going to be in it for the long haul. Yeah.
You're brilliant. And talking about international markets, like growing Spotify from 6 to 65, what are some of the things to consider if you're a company and you want to grow internationally? What did you learn? What did you expect versus what happened?
Yeah, so I've done that at 2 or 3, probably 3 or 4 different companies now, full time as an advisor. So it's actually very, very interesting, and the cases are very, very different. Right? In the case of Spotify, before launching a new market, Spotify first and foremost is a content company, and because it's a content company, before launching a new market, Spotify had to acquire the rights and licenses of the songs in these individual markets. So the roadblock, so to speak, was licenses. So understanding the local licensing market is important before you launch in that market, right? So then when you have that sort of hold up, then you have to look at the world and try to figure out which are the markets with the most transparent license ecosystem. Like who owns what song. Like Beyonce and Drake has a song. Then you need to understand who exactly owns that rights in that country. If it's transparent and very easily recognizable, then you launch the market, right? So that's one consideration for content companies, because it takes a long time to acquire and negotiate for these licenses locally on a case-by-case basis before you launch. Now, other analogies could be fintech companies, right? Like neobanks, for example. Some banks have to comply to local regulations or acquire certain licenses. Now they can't just switch on all over, right? So if you're like Netflix, you can't just. Netflix eventually launched around the world, but that's because they acquired global licenses. But before that, they only launched in 1 or 2 different countries at a time. So if you're a content company or a bank company, you sort of approach it on a case-by-case basis. And once you've developed the playbook and you have a big enough team to negotiate for these licenses or comply with local regulations, then you can launch publicly. So that's one big consideration, right? Okay. Now, on the other hand, if you have companies like Tinder, where you're a mobile app, then your app is already present all around the world, right? So because you launch from Los Angeles, like you just choose all the countries that you want to launch in the Apple iStore, and you're like, boom, next day you're live all over the place. Then your launch strategy is very, very dependent on the size of the market, the GDP, the addressable market in each country. And then if you're long enough in the market, it depends on how your performance in the market is before you decide on whether or not to invest more resources. When you decide to invest more resources, you can then decide whether you can invest in resources on the ground or you can invest from central. There's some functions that you can scale through keeping your headcount or your budget in HQ. There's some other functions that, like for example, in South Africa, there are a lot of things that you can do in South Africa without having to be in South Africa. Right, you can also do a lot of marketing campaigns from US or from Europe. You don't have to be in South Africa, but if there are elements of your business where you have to conduct business locally, like partnerships, some form of partnerships, you have to be local, you have to fly in. So that there's also a balance there you want to consider. But so that's how I would do it. For the most part, it's based on content and licenses and where the big markets are. So you have to do it one by one. And the other case where you're available globally, again, it's based on like where the fastest growing markets, the largest opportunity.
Okay, great. We've got a few questions here. One question from Raymond Mugwanya says, what approach do you use to segment your customers? I guess now it's just in any field, like what approach do you use?
Yeah, I think the word we use is persona. So how do you segment your personas? So understanding the persona is very, very important. Personas are individuals or profiles that you craft in order to, there's a template for it. There's who, what they do, how does it, like there are decision-making personas, there's influencer personas in an organization, there are user personas, there are budget owner personas. So even before you think about approach, like the approach is to understand them at a very granular level, right? Who are the users who are going to buy your product? Who are the users who are going to use your product? Who are the users who's going to influence who are the individuals who are going to influence the decision making of the product? Who are the decision makers, right? They're sort of like in the consumer world, it could be all one, right? The average consumer, like no one's going to tell you, hey, I recommend that you use Facebook. You decide that you use Facebook, right? So it's all four in one. But in the B2B world, there could be different personas that decide on these things. That's one. Now, then you sort of look at personality types, right? Like on demographic. So once you've gone to the persona, then you look at demographics. Like in the consumer world, you look at 18-year-old male, 19-year-old male, 25-year-old female, who drives a car, who lives in the suburbs, like 35-year-old male who's single and lives in the city. Then you build customer personas that way, right? To understand what they do so that you can then better target them. In the B2B world, again, it's what I said earlier. So you have to develop, you can't just go after audience. You can't have very, very vague and unsophisticated definition of audiences. You have to go very, very deep. And if you sort of do this often enough, you know that in the IT and tech world, the personas are more often fleshed out. It's just rinse and repeat because everyone wants to go after engineers. Engineers have the same persona. You don't have to rinse and repeat. People understand what the personas are. The average consumer, people understand the personas because if you're long enough, you sort of know what they do. So that's how I would go by building like an audience definition.
Okay. Nixon is asking, what entrepreneurial traits or tactics have made the biggest difference among your successful investments?
I think it's less about tactics, but more about just going back to my point, being ruthless, being highly iterative, being customer first, customer obsession, customer consumer obsession, like just spending days trying to understand what they want, what they need, what problems they need solving. Highly iterative, like the feedback, like when I meet with the founder I didn't invest in a month ago, like when I catch up with the founder a month later, I've noticed the 20 things that they've done with the product, and I go, wow, this is phenomenal. Doesn't mean I'll invest. I'm like, wow, that's like phenomenal. They're able to iterate. It shows that you're learning, your learning capacity per dollar spent or learning capacity by time is very, very fast and rapid. So that's what we look for. And ruthless, people who think about their business day and night, who know a lot about the business, who sort of, when you ask them questions, they're very, very thoughtful. They know exactly what their weaknesses are, what the strengths are, how they're going about to mitigate weakness. You can sort of, it oozes from them when you ask the question. Like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? They'll be like, yeah, we thought about this, but it doesn't work because of this. We're going to put that on hold for now. We're going after this metric. They're like, wow, you actually, it shows that you're thought. Again, you're like a student. You thought about it, right?
Yes.
If you ask your question, have you thought about this? It might work. They're like, oh, interesting. You said that. You didn't think of that. Then it's sort of like, oh, wait a minute, you haven't done your homework, So those are the three traits. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, great. And now with COVID-19. During and post COVID, what are the things, or what are the type of businesses do you see to potentially do well post COVID?
Oh, I mean,
and which ones do you think are dead? Like in South Africa, it would be like, which ones are level 1 type businesses? Like we only go back when the world is completely okay.
So I am going to actually. So a friend of mine wrote a. So I am literally going to copy, and there's so many, like, so just give me 1 second. I'm gonna send this link to the audience, and I think that would answer the question. So my friend of mine wrote that, but
okay.
it's like I don't want to. I mean, I can also summarize that, but at a high level, it talks about industries that are impacted by COVID, industries that will be encouraged by COVID, right? So I would encourage people to read that document because it's very, very interesting to see how investors think about it. Like challenging industries, as you can imagine, would be like hotels, sports, transportation, construction, fitness, restaurant, tourism, online dating, film production, like online education, like the ones that are going to do really well, video conferencing, delivery, subscription, remote work, video conferencing, online education, e-com, video games, virtual reality, like stuff like that.
I see. Okay, great. We've got two very interesting questions. One is from, okay, at least it's not Thanos. So it's Thanos. Says, how can Africa compete on the international market with technology? I think meaning would tech developed in Africa do well internationally, or would the tech have to come from Silicon Valley?
Yeah,
I'm guessing that's what the question is.
So I think a lot of people overestimate the importance of technology. The reality is opportunities like talent is distributed globally, right? And the internet has reduced the barriers of distribution, and the tools available in the market these days have reduced the barriers to creation, right? So you have a lot of no-code tools, you have a lot of simplified like design tools, developer tools, creation tools, product tools that have been that are now free and easy to use, right? So the tools available for creating and to make products have sort of there's a Cambrian expansion. I mean, in the past few years, there's so many tools out there that you can use, right? So now you have like people around the world have what it takes to build. There's no reason not to build, right? If you have a decent internet infrastructure, not even infrastructure, if you have decent internet, there is an opportunity for you to build, right? So that's one. I think tech has been. I think it's far more easier today to build a global business than it is before, because your tools are available online. You can be anywhere to build a global business, right?
Yes.
So the tools are available, and it's democratized in a way, and it's easy for you to build. Now, funding is a little bit of a different story, right? There are hot pockets in in Africa where funding is more available than other places, right? So there's San Francisco, there's London, there are all these different places. So access to funding may be asymmetrical, may not be distributed widely. You know what I mean? May be concentrated, but the tools are democratized. So but I know in sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, I know a lot of European VCs are looking at this market. A lot of some American VCs are, most aren't, some are. But in the world of COVID, everything is done remotely, so you don't have to fly anywhere. It's all like, you know what I mean. So it's all about understanding the best way to reach out and best way to get introduced, and then making it happen. So funding. Again, I mean, the best situation is you build a business that doesn't require funding, right? That you build a self-sustaining business through cash flow that customers provide, which is the best form of funding.
Yes.
And then once you're big enough and noticeable enough, then you go get funding.
Excellent. Could you go into that a little bit more? Because a lot of people just say, I've got an idea, I need funding. I've got an idea, I need funding. You tell us about methods in which you can just build a company and not require funding until maybe you want to grow bigger, or maybe you might not even need to do that.
I mean, that's a very rare case, and I mentioned it as if it was, like these things happen every day, but it's still hard. Like whether you're venture backed or not venture backed, the problems are still it's still a very, very hard challenge to build a business. So like building a business is hard. And then building something that venture capitalists is harder, right? Building something that doesn't require venture capitalists, but purely on cash flow is the hardest. So I'm telling you, it's hard to build a bit, you know what I mean? So
yes, and
building a business is hard. Building something that VCs like is harder, but building something that's self-sufficient is the hardest. So I can't
So
I don't want to be dismissive of the fact that it's just very easy to build. A self-sustaining business, because that's very, very hard.
What are the types of businesses that require VC funding, like VC-backed businesses? Because I get a lot of here because the funding landscape is new, so words are used interchangeably, and almost everybody says, "Look, I need to raise money," and maybe they just have a store and they want to raise VC capital.
Venture capitalists invest in companies for an outsized return. If you want to build a $10 billion business, like not even one, because one, a lot of people can do it these days, like $5 billion businesses, $1 billion, $10 billion businesses, then venture capitalists might be interested. If you're building a lemonade store by the street, I mean, that's not a $1 billion business. You know what I mean? Then you need a bank loan, right? So generally software-based or high capex, right? Even if it's software-based, like if it's a market that's growing 5% year on year, like venture capitalists are not interested in that because VCs are interested in fast scale, high growth industries, right? Like SaaS could be an interesting one, but some SaaS businesses can grow at 5 to 20% year on year based on the market. So that's less interesting. Some SaaS businesses are growing at 80% year on year. That's more interesting for venture, right? So you want to be aware of those things.
Great. What general advice would you have for the audience? The audience is mainly people who are starting companies, early stage entrepreneurs, and in different fields. What would be the general advice you'd have for entrepreneurs this time?
I think do a lot of homework. I think a lot of founders start for the sake of starting. I think a lot of them just do it because it's cool to start a company. I think you need to read up. There's a lot of preparation that's needed. You need to speak to a lot of customers. It's actually a grunt, and be prepared. Like if you're starting a company, you need to convince yourself that this is something that you want to do for the next 10 years. It's a long haul journey. Like investors can sniff out if you're just doing it for different motivations. It's easy to sniff out through questions because you may, so you have to be prepared to do this for 10 years, and you have to be prepared to do the research and work to understand whether it's needed or not. And investors have a way of questioning and finding out about this very, very easy based on your background, based on what you say, based on what you do. So be prepared for the long haul.
Oh, brilliant. Great. Thank you very much. I think that's really, really been insightful, and the long haul, like be prepared for the long haul, I think is a good way of closing it, because a lot of times we just hear of companies say, okay, this fund is worth so many billions and so many billions, and think that it just happened overnight within just a short space of time. And like you've said, it takes a very long time. Thank you for taking time with us. Thank you for getting up early for us. And thank you for all of this. Thanks.
No, thank you, and I hope I was helpful. And best of luck to everyone who's starting a company.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Thank you.
Sriram.
Bye.
Bye.